Why did Kodak, one of the largest companies, go from making a profit of 2.5 billion in 1999 to being removed from the S&P 500 in 2010? You will get the answer in this module about the marketing environment. Now let's continue with our example from business history. Here is some background on Kodak. It was a giant in the camera film industry, and the phrase Kodak moment referred to a moment worth capturing on film. Yet, after watching this video, you might come to understand a Kodak moment as failing to respond to or missing technological developments that are relevant to your business. Although Kodak's demise was more complex than simply missing technological developments, the company's failure to act on its own market research indicating that digital cameras were the future was a major factor in its downfall. This case demonstrates the importance of companies monitoring the marketing environment and making proactive decisions that align with it. In this module, you will learn how to analyze a company's marketing environment by understanding its micro and macro environments. You will also learn why continuous environmental scanning is crucial for achieving business success. Responding to developments in the business environment is essential for companies to capitalize on opportunities strategically and mitigate risks that could negatively impact their business. I'm Dr. Matthias Glaser. Let's get down to business. Welcome to Module 2 of my Marketing Fundamentals course. This lecture is about the marketing environment and is called Navigating Waves of Change. Why do I use this maritime metaphor? Just like ships navigating the open ocean, companies must constantly adapt to changing business environments. Today we'll explore the marketing environment. Now let me give you an overview of today's module. As you can see on the screen, I've structured it into 3 main sections. First, we will go through environmental analysis. This involves understanding the fundamentals of the marketing environment and exploring both the microenvironment, which consists of factors close to your company, and the macroenvironment, which consists of larger, uncontrollable forces. There will also be an interactive quiz to test your knowledge. Second, we will examine market phenomena. Have you ever wondered why some products become overnight sensations only to disappear just as quickly? Or why some trends persist for years? We'll distinguish between fads, trends, and megatrends. And trust me, understanding these differences is crucial for your marketing strategy. The third section is the conclusion. In this section, I will synthesize the content and finish with a few words on building resilient companies. Let's start with the fundamental question. What exactly is the marketing environment? Take a moment to think about it. When running a business or developing a marketing strategy, do you operate in a vacuum? Of course not. The marketing environment is the ecosystem of external and internal forces, actors and factors that influence an organization's ability to build and maintain successful relationships with its target customers. Here is the key insight I want you to remember. Marketing does not exist in a vacuum. It operates within a constantly shifting landscape. The companies that truly excel are those that master continuous environmental scanning. They don't just react to changes. They anticipate them and transform potential crises into competitive advantages, ideally. Take a look at the diagram on the screen. Do you see the 3 concentric circles? In the center in red is the company itself, representing the company's internal environment. This includes the finance, R&D, and operations departments, as well as the beloved marketing department. Your internal strengths and weaknesses come from this internal environment. Now let's break the company's external environment down into 2 tiers. The middle green layer represents the microenvironment, or the company's immediate sphere of influence. These are the entities close to your company that directly impact your ability to serve customers. Think of your suppliers, competitors, and customers. These are environmental aspects that you can influence to some degree. What about the outer blue circle? It represents the macroenvironment, or the larger societal forces that affect the company and its microenvironment. These factors include the economy, technology, politics, and culture. These forces are largely uncontrollable and create both opportunities and threats. Here's a question for you to ponder. Can you think of a recent example of a company that failed because it didn't pay attention to its environment? Maybe a company that missed a technological shift or failed to adapt to changing customer values, except for Kodak, which we just discussed and is a rather old example. First, let's take a closer look at the microenvironment. This is your company's immediate sphere of influence, so understanding each stakeholder is critical. Take a look at this diagram. The company is at the center, surrounded by the 5 key stakeholder groups in the microenvironment. As we discussed in the prior module, the entire company needs to align for market-oriented success. Only if all departments work together can the company consistently provide value to its customers. For example, if you want to create a brand that offers high-quality sweets, you might need to use a handmade production process which incurs higher costs. The finance department cannot block this necessary quality differentiation because it incurs higher costs. For example, Café Fürst is a coffee shop in the center of Salzburg that has existed for over 100 years. They have patented the term original for the iconic sweet, the Mozartkugel, which stands for high quality. Competitors can use real or true, but they cannot call their Mozartkugel original. Still, this attribute would mean little if the product were not different from industrially manufactured Mozartkugel. If they reduced costs by automating production at the insistence of the finance department, they would compromise the value they offer, their strategy, their heritage, and their differentiation. This is not a product placement. I chose their product because I'm already addicted to their chocolates, and my students at the University of Salzburg are likely familiar with this local brand. Now, let me walk you through each stakeholder in the microenvironment, because each plays a vital role in your marketing success. I will provide unconnected examples to illustrate each one. Still, feel free to think through the process using the same company as the basis for your examples. First, customers are the centerpiece of business. A company needs to deeply analyze their needs, behaviors, and pain points. Let me give you an example. Patagonia. They don't just sell outdoor gear, they understand their customers' values regarding environmental sustainability, aligning their entire business model accordingly. The Don't Buy This Jacket campaign and the Worn Wear initiative, where customers can return and exchange Patagonia gear, reflect the company's commitment to its customers' values. The important point is that the company's actions center on providing value to customers, not just making a profit. Next, let's talk about competitors. They aren't just your company's direct rivals. You also need to watch out for indirect competitors and potential new entrants. Consider the current platform wars such as Instagram versus TikTok. Instagram has had to fundamentally adapt its strategy because of TikTok's rise. Strategic positioning is key to gaining an advantage. For example, Instagram changed its product by adding short video formats called Reels and Stories to match TikTok's short video format, which had made it so successful. Then there are publics, which are any groups that have an interest in or impact on your organization. These groups could include the media, the government, or citizen action groups. For example, Greenpeace targeted Nestlé over its palm oil sourcing. Greenpeace produced a parody ad that went viral, forcing Nestlé to take action. That's the power of publics. Greenpeace's approach was rather drastic, using a bloody parody of a typical Kit Kat ad to make their case. Let's just say that the central message involves munching on cut-off monkey fingers. If you can't stomach it, don't search for it online. Intermediaries are partners that help promote, sell, and distribute products. In today's digital age, consider the influence of digital gatekeepers such as the Apple App Store. If you're a mobile app developer, you have to play by their rules, and Apple gets a large portion of your revenue. Finally, we have suppliers. Their role should not be underestimated or based solely on cost. Let me use KFC, Kentucky Fried Chicken, in the UK as an instructive example. In 2018, they literally ran out of chicken due to a supplier failure. They had switched logistics providers to reduce costs, but the centralized logistics model did not work, leaving Kentucky Fried Chicken with no chicken to fry. So in a way, the chickens did come home to roost. Consequently, Kentucky Fried Chicken became Kentucky Fried, and ever since they have only sold fried dough. Joking aside, they had to close hundreds of stores, resulting in a significant loss of revenue. Suppliers' reliability affects costs, quality, and timelines, and cheaper is not always the best choice. Oh, and this video shows one of the chickens that survived because of that KFC shutdown. I created it with Gen AI to illustrate the example, but it did not turn out well, which makes it at least entertaining somehow. Now, to stimulate your thoughts on the microenvironment, which of these stakeholders would have the biggest impact on your business if you were starting a new company today? You may want to think about that before continuing to watch. With regard to the microenvironment, I also recommend watching this video about Porter's 5 forces model. It offers a different perspective and complements our view of the business environment. I will put the link in the description. It will help you better understand the attractiveness of an industry in which a company operates. Now we're moving to the macroenvironment, those larger, mostly uncontrollable forces. We will analyze them systematically. Let me break down each component for you. First, political and legal factors. Political factors include government policy, trade restrictions, and political stability. For example, consider the US-China trade war. This wasn't something individual companies could control, but it fundamentally reshaped global supply chains and forced businesses to rethink their strategies. Consider the massive tariffs, for example, and how companies needed to find ways to deal with these new realities of pricing their products, passing on these costs, or absorbing them. This could affect market share and the attractiveness of the US market for companies. Legal factors include regulations and compliance requirements. The GDPR in Europe completely changed how companies handle customer data. Those who weren't prepared faced massive fines. Economic factors influence purchasing power and consumer spending. Consider inflation, interest rates, and unemployment, for example. For instance, when the European Central Bank raises interest rates, that affects everything from consumer loans to business investments. Another example is the hyperinflation that Venezuela struggled with for a prolonged period. At one point, the IMF estimated that inflation would reach 10 million%. Yes, 10 million%. That is hyperinflation. Basically, the money was not worth the paper it was printed on. As you can see in this image, migrants from Venezuela were making crafts, I guess like origami, from Venezuelan banknotes. At least although the banknotes were worthless, they found new value as origami crafts. One could call this upcycling. Inflation at this level destabilizes a country. Even normal inflation rates put financial pressure on consumers, affecting their purchasing behavior, while companies face rising costs and consumers who spend less liberally. Sociocultural and demographic factors relate to population trends and cultural shifts. For example, many developed countries are experiencing declining birth rates and increasing life expectancy. Not looking at anyone in particular, South Korea. Another aspect of the demographic shift in industrialized nations is the significant increase in single-person households. Naturally, single-person households consume differently, and companies have started to adapt by serving their products in smaller, more suitable portions, or by specifically promoting their products to singles. In China, Singles' Day has become a huge shopping holiday, providing an opportunity for companies to sell more products. Can you guess the date of Singles' Day? I'll give you a few seconds to think. 1, 2, 3. Well, it is November 11th, because yes, this means 4 times a single one. Technological factors. This one is moving fast. Technology is crucial in our day and age, but when assessing technology and its impact, don't get carried away. Remember the hype cycle introduced by Gartner consultant Jackie Fan, also known as the Gartner hype cycle. For example, think about artificial intelligence. These days, large language models are all the rage, and there's a lack of distinction between the different AI technologies. Anything with the label AI gets venture capital. This reminds me of the dot-com boom and bubble. Other current technological developments of interest include blockchain and the Internet of Things. These innovations don't just create new products, they transform entire business models. For example, Kodak's failure to adapt to digital photography is a cautionary tale. Although Kodak monitored their environment, they did not want to respond to the impending changes, or they underestimated them. To be clear, it is not sufficient to possess information. You must also act on it. Of course, in hindsight, it is always easier to see errors, but still, this was an unforced error, given that they had heard the research insights, but they did not listen to them. And finally, environmental or ecological factors such as sustainability, climate change, and resource scarcity are important considerations. For instance, the Panama Canal was impacted by a severe drought, and climate change increases the frequency of extreme weather events. If you own a resort close to the ocean, for example, and the difference between your building and the sea level is small, rising sea levels will pose a risk to your investment over time. Consequently, you need to take action, whether it is to move further up the land with your hotel or call the flooded Hotel Atlantis, where people can go to swim. No sunk costs in this lecture. Another option is to diversify and invest in mountain hotels in countries like Austria, which has great mountains. Here's a question to consider. Which factors do you think will be the most important for businesses in the next decade? Remember that when analyzing the macroenvironment, the goal is to understand its dynamics. This classification only lays the foundation for that understanding. Although one factor may be most relevant in a given situation, factors are often intertwined, creating chain reactions. For example, changes in sociocultural values regarding sustainability lead to political will for change, resulting in legislation and the development of green technology, which led to technological innovations in that area. Now let's continue with a case study to illustrate the macro factors a little more. Let's pause here and take a look at this beautiful image. This is the Schönbrunn Palace in Vienna, Austria. A UNESCO World Heritage Site, Schönbrunn receives millions of visitors annually. It includes a museum and is run by a company. Here is a crucial question. How do they market a 300-year-old palace in the 21st century? They must consider the environmental factors we discussed. Economically, exchange rates and the disposable income of international tourists affect them. Socioculturally, they must appeal to changing visitor expectations. People don't just want to see heritage sites and read descriptions, they want experiences. Technologically, they must keep up with the times and invest in online booking systems and an online presence. Concerning the political legal factor, they must comply with heritage preservation laws and accessibility requirements. Environmentally, or in terms of sustainability, they must balance visitor numbers with conservation efforts because visitors wear down heritage sites. This is a good example of how even traditional institutions must navigate a complex marketing environment. What environmental factors do you think pose the biggest challenge for heritage tourism sites like this one? Perhaps you can think of a heritage site in your region to use as a scenario for answering this question. In addition, we will now continue with a brief interactive quiz. Alright, now it's time to put your knowledge to the test. This slide has an interactive scenario classification quiz. The game will present you with different business scenarios, and your job is to correctly classify each one into the appropriate category. One of the macroenvironmental factors we discussed. You can see the categories or types for these factors on the left. You will also see the number of available scenarios and your score. You get a point for every correct answer. Take your time with this. Read each scenario carefully and think about which category it truly belongs to. You will receive immediate feedback with explanation, so it's a good learning opportunity. We will do a few together now, and I will make this quiz available online. If so, I will put the link in the description so you can go through all the scenarios yourself if you want. So let's start with the first scenario. That's in Germany. Flight shame movement reduces business travel bookings by 30% as a sociocultural factor. Let's log that in.
Tourism slump reduces disposable income. That's an economic factor. Lock that in. And we always get a quick explanation as well. Zero waste lifestyle, that's sociocultural factor that might influence consumption patterns. "5G expansion enables augmented reality." That's a technological factor. In South Korea, escape the corset movement. That's a socio-cultural factor, might change demand in the beauty and cosmetics industry.
Now let's continue with the lecture. Now let's focus on demand patterns over time and discuss the typical market phenomena that result. Let's start with fads. Do you know what a pet rock is? We'll come to that example in a bit. A fad is generally defined as a product style or behavior that is rapidly adopted and achieves peak popularity quickly, only to decline just as fast. The key characteristic of a fad is its novelty appeal. Fads usually satisfy superficial rather than fundamental needs, suggesting that they don't have a lasting impact on society. Let me outline the key characteristics of fads. First, fads last for only weeks or months, rarely exceeding 1 year. Second, the adoption pattern is an extremely rapid rise followed by an equally swift decline. The market is usually narrow and limited to specific demographics. There's also a strong novelty factor, creating high initial excitement. Or maybe a nonsense factor, if you will, but it's still normal. But this leads to the catch, the lack of longevity. Such fad products rarely survive beyond the initial enthusiasm. You might be familiar with fads such as Labubu, Pokemon Go, and Tamagotchi. Yet the pet rock is my favorite example, hands down. It was literally just a rock in a box that was marketed as the perfect pet that required no care. I'm not sure if this is the original or a revamped version in the image, but you get the idea. It sold millions in a matter of months before disappearing completely. It made its inventor a millionaire, and rumor has it that he came up with the idea in a bar. Why did this fad take off? This happened in the 1970s, and I think it captured the zeitgeist well. People wanted a pet, but not the responsibility of taking care of one. It was also kind of funny. Besides that, the operational marketing, specifically the packaging reminiscent of a real pet and the stone in a nest, added to its humorous appeal. Of course, this was completely unsustainable, and the fad ended after a few months. Still, unlike usual fads, it left its mark in the Oxford Dictionary, becoming associated with words such as useless and pointless. Here's the marketing insight you need to remember. While fads can generate substantial short-term revenue, businesses must recognize their temporary nature and avoid over-investing in inventory or infrastructure. The key is to capitalize quickly while the opportunity exists, yet before trying to capitalize on a fad, ask yourself if it aligns with your brand. You don't want to compromise your strategic positioning. In addition, remember that profiting from a fad requires luck, or at least the favor of the algorithm in today's environment, and thus the corresponding risk appetite. So ask yourself, if you spot a potential fad, how would you structure your business to profit from it without allocating too many resources? Would you even want to be involved in fads? Furthermore, I believe that our society has become increasingly fad-driven over time, a trend reinforced by algorithms on social media. You can think about whether this is a good thing. Let's talk about something more substantial. Trends. Unlike fads, trends are medium to long-term directions of change in consumer preferences, behaviors, or market conditions. What is the crucial difference between trends and fads? Trends reflect deeper shifts in values and lifestyle, making them more predictable and strategically significant for business planning. What are the characteristics of trends? They have a gradual rise, a sustained plateau, and then a slow decline or evolution into something else. Their market impact is broad, influencing multiple industries and demographics. Trends are rooted in evolving consumer values and societal changes. Importantly, trends offer predictability. They can be forecast through careful market analysis. Let me give you two concrete examples. First, the health and fitness movement which emphasizes wellness, organic foods, and active lifestyle, has been sustained for decades. It's not going anywhere. In fact, it keeps evolving and strengthening. Another example is athleisure fashion, the blending of athletic and casual wear that emerged in the 2010s. For example, Lululemon built an empire on this trend. The trend has lasted much longer than anyone initially expected because it taps into fundamental lifestyle changes. Here's your marketing insight. Successful businesses align their strategies with identified trends, adapting their products and services to meet evolving customer expectations. When properly leveraged, trends offer sustainable opportunities for innovation and growth. Some food for thought. Think about this. Can you identify a current trend in your field of interest? How could you develop a business strategy based on it? Now we are taking it to the next level with megatrends. These transformative global forces reshape societies, economies, and industries worldwide. A megatrend is both large-scale and long-term. We're not talking about changes that occur in a few years, we're talking about changes that occur over decades. These powerful forces operate across generations and affect virtually every aspect of business and life. This requires strategic adaptation from all organizations. Let me walk you through the characteristics. The duration often spans multiple decades and can result in permanent changes. The scope is global, affecting all industries and societies. Megatrends have a profound influence, fundamentally transforming business models and market structures. Megatrends create new paradigms that are difficult to reverse, making them irreversible. They are also complex and are driven by multiple interconnected factors. Let me give you 3 examples of current megatrends. The first is sustainability and climate action. This global transformation encompasses renewable energy, a circular economy, and environmental responsibility. It's reshaping all industries. Second is digital transformation. The pervasive integration of digital technologies is revolutionizing communication, commerce, and daily life. Having a website is no longer enough. Businesses must reimagine how they operate in a digital world, considering recent developments such as large language models. Third is the silver society. Increasing life expectancy and aging populations are creating new consumer segments with significant purchasing power and distinct needs. Companies that understand and cater to older consumers will thrive. In many developed countries, this demographic shift is linked to the rise of a silver society, a consumer segment with significant purchasing power. Here's the critical marketing insight. Organizations must integrate megatrend analysis into strategic planning. Those who anticipate and adapt to megatrends gain a sustainable competitive advantage, while those who ignore them risk becoming obsolete. Megatrends present businesses with great challenges and opportunities. Using generative AI, I created an image of a silver society in Salzburg. While you can see the fortress and the dome, I don't believe there's a street offering this exact view. The shop names seem to be targeted toward the silver society. Anyway, question for you. Which of these megatrends do you think will have the greatest impact on your field of interest or work? We covered everything from the micro to the macro environment, including fads and megatrends. Now let me bring it all together for you. Understanding the marketing environment is an ongoing process. It's not something you do once and then move on from. Rather, it's an ongoing process of scanning, analyzing, and adapting strategically. In today's turbulent landscape, this capability is more critical than ever. As we conclude, I'll share 2 key points with you. First, from analysis to action. Companies that excel at monitoring and responding to their environment are best positioned to anticipate opportunities, mitigate threats, and build a sustainable competitive advantage. But here's the key. It's not enough to simply collect and analyze data. You must act on what you learn. Remember the Kodak example. They had the information, but they did not act on it soon enough. Second is the agile marketer. The future belongs to organizations that master environmental intelligence. To succeed, you need to develop 3 capabilities. First, continuous monitoring. You need systems and processes that constantly scan your environment. Stay informed by following industry publications, tracking competitors, listening to customers both online and offline, and talking to experts. Make environmental scanning part of your routine. Second, rapid response and agility. When you spot a change, respond quickly. Companies that succeed aren't necessarily those that predict every change. Rather, they are those that adapt fastest when change happens. Third, scenario planning. Don't just plan for the most likely future. Plan for multiple possible futures. What if your industry is disrupted by new technology? What if economic conditions change dramatically? Have contingency plans ready. To conclude, I would like to share an idiom that highlights key aspects of the marketing environment. It likely originated from one of Aesop's fables and made its way into the Korean language. Tage moger pitorodo sebogen onda. Even if you wring a chicken's neck, dawn will still come. I will offer two interpretations of this proverb that both apply well to the marketing environment. First, you need to understand what is happening and correctly identify patterns. Otherwise, you may commit a logical fallacy and get into trouble. Specifically, misunderstanding the cause of an event will cause problem. For example, you need to understand that correlation does not necessarily imply causation. The second interpretation is that change is inevitable. No matter how much we resist it or how comfortable we are with the status quo, the environment will change. Dawn will come. New technologies will emerge. Customer preferences will shift. Competitors will innovate. Regulations will evolve. The question isn't if change will happen, it will. The question is, will you be ready for it? Have you been monitoring your environment closely enough to anticipate these changes? Will you be agile enough to adapt? Will you view change as an opportunity rather than a threat? In the next video, we will talk about marketing strategy, which is also informed by the marketing environment. More resources, such as quizzes to reinforce your learning, are available in the video description. See you in the next module.